Good afternoon. I'm Greg Kazera, the Director of Marketing and Sales for Shale Crescent USA, a regional, nonprofit, non-government research and marketing organization. A couple years ago, I was on the student radio station at the University of Colorado, and we were talking about energy, but particularly oil and gas and petrochemicals. And right in the middle of the interview, the host totally shuts down, and he says this to the audience: "Did you hear what he just said, dear friends?" And I'm thinking, whoa, where are we going from here? And then he said this. He said, we don't like wells, and we don't like petrochemical plants, but we like our cars and our cell phones and our skis and our climbing ropes. And if we're going to have those things, doesn't it make sense for them to be manufactured in the USA under U.S. environmental law? And they'll create American jobs. And I'm like, wow, he got it. And I think during this pandemic, folks, a lot of Americans have got it. Most people didn't realize how much. They knew we were getting stuff from overseas, and particularly China. Nobody really understood how much. They didn't think about PPE or medical equipment or you name it, cell phones, all those things that were prescription drugs, all that stuff that we're getting that suddenly we couldn't get. And one of the things that we've learned at Shale Crescent USA when the whole pandemic thing started, most of our leads and prospects come from conferences. And suddenly the conferences went away. And we realized that we better do something if we're going to continue to carry our regional message to the world, and certainly to the United States. And so we did. We have a lot of media contacts, and we put together a topic that said, does the pandemic mean that made in the USA is a must? And we put that out to the media, and a magical thing happened, folks. We've been on 51 radio shows since the middle of March, and these aren't small-time stuff. We've been in Boston, New York, Charlotte, Miami, Tampa, Chicago, Denver, San Diego, Los Angeles, Seattle, and even on KDK in Pittsburgh. And 22 of those 51 were national shows. We were on Westwood One, First Light. Mike Toscano, one of the leading radio news shows in America, heard in all 50 states, and it's rebroadcast twice after the 5 o'clock initial live broadcast. And we got 15 minutes. And here's what we learned from all that radio, all that media, is no matter where people lived, urban, rural, no matter what their political persuasion, everyone wants manufacturing and jobs to come back to the United States. And when we do that, the second question that we always get is, can we really do that? And if we can, how can we? Well, folks, you're in for a treat, because that question is going to be answered for you this afternoon by our panel of experts. And we've got with us today, we've got Jerry James, president of Artex Oil, and he's going to talk about energy. We've got Wally Candle, senior VP of Solvay. He's going to talk about petrochemicals. And we got Leon Perez, Dr. Leon Perez, the president of Pressure Chemical in Pittsburgh. And he's a little further downstream, so he'll give his perspective. So, gentlemen.
Thank you. We want to thank the opportunity here at Pittsburgh Chemical Day by Shale Crescent USA be here talking. Greg gave a great introduction. What we're going to be talking about is rebuilding the economy with energy, petrochemicals, and manufacturing. Really, when you look at this, Greg went right at it. As we start to recover from this pandemic, a lot of people are going to start to say, how do we rebuild our economy? How do we rebuild jobs? It's really fortunate of us. We formed Shale Crescent USA, and Greg alluded to it. We're a volunteer organization that has done the fundamental research on what's the advantage of manufacturing here in the region and in the U.S. in general, with this enormous opportunity that's been created because of the increased oil and gas production from shale drilling. We're a volunteer group from all 3 states. We have over 30 members of executives from all different type of businesses. And that's what we're here to share with you today. This is economically feasible. The reason it's economically feasible, and I got to give a lot of credit to Greg on this. Several years ago, we learned something that was both fundamentally profound but simple. And that is, after we did a lot of research, and we have really detailed studies that if you're a chemical company or a manufacturing company, we'd love to share with you for free, is that if you build on top of the resource here in the Shale Crescent USA, and you build in the center of your customers, you can save money on manufacturing. And that's why we're optimistic coming out of this pandemic, that we can create manufacturing jobs in this area and help rebuild the American economy. Our talk was back to basics. And when you look at back to basics, there's a great story about Vince Lombardi. I know we've missed a lot of sports during the last several months, so we got to go back to a historic coach from my era. One of the greatest coaches ever back in the 1960s was Vince Lombardi. What most people don't know, and they've actually heard one of his famous quotes was, "Gentlemen, this is a football." And you see he's holding the football in the picture. The background story is fascinating, though. They had taken a devastating loss in the championship game in the last few minutes in the 1960s and lost the championship. He starts the next season by saying, "Gentlemen, this is a football," to his assembled team. And then they went through the fundamentals of football, and it's all about blocking and tackling. So if you've ever heard the quote, "It's all about blocking and tackling," it comes from this speech that he gave. One of his tight wideouts kind of quipped to him, "Coach, could you slow down? You're getting too fast for us." Well, he didn't crack a smile. He went right on talking about it. Well, how did it work for Vince Lombardi? He went on and his team never again lost a playoff game, and they won 5 out of the next 7 championships. We can win too, but we've got to understand the basics, advantages we have here in the United States, and that's what Wally and I will share with you today. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of energy and manufacturing. Hopefully we'll have some things you've never heard before. We're going to talk about reshoring manufacturing jobs, and there'll be some discussion about China, because China's the largest exporter in the world. And then we're going to talk about the manufacturing advantages right here in Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania in the Shale Crescent region. When you look at the unemployment chart right here, this is what you see. What you see is we're at historic high levels. We're as high as the Great Recession that we had in 2008. A few months ago, we were almost as high as the Great Depression. So we're at a unique point when you talk about trying to rebuild this economy. And quite frankly, it's important for us that are in energy, the petrochemicals, and the manufacturing business to take part in this conversation. If you look back in the history, some of the ideas in the Great Depression were not helpful, and they're actually counterproductive. Some of the ideas that came out of the Great Recession in 2008 were not helpful, and they were actually counterproductive. We need to lead this conversation to people listening to this, because we have ideas that could be helpful and will be productive. If this is a quote from Trump, and actually Greg mentioned this too. If one thing comes out of this more than anything else, it's that we should have products made here in the United States. That is the one blessing that maybe came out of COVID. All of a sudden, people are realizing that things should be made here. And we're going to show you, just in a second, a short video, a montage of videos from different people from all walks of government. But it's interesting to listen to their thought process. Almost every time, they're starting to talk about bringing things here to be manufactured here.
Well, I think one of the things the coronavirus has done, Tucker, is just lay bare the fact that our globalized economy is an economy that really works for China, first and foremost, and not for the United States, certainly not for American workers. Our supply chains, where are they now? In China. Our medical devices, where are they made? China. Our pharmaceuticals, where are they made? China. Our big tech companies, who do they want to do business with? China. I think it's time that we asked ourselves, what kind of an economy have we allowed to be created, and what is it doing for American workers? We need some structural reform.
Because the key here is having advanced manufacturing on U.S. soil that can leapfrog other countries, so we don't have to worry about competing against cheap sweatshop labor, lax environmental regulations, different tax regimes, and the massive subsidies of foreign governments who are actually directly attacking our industrial base.
But also the supply chain issue. The idea that much of what we need to protect the health of the American people is in the control of foreign governments who can interdict it and say we're not shipping stuff to the United States when everyone else in the world wants it during a pandemic was a crazy situation to get into. Happened before this administration, and the president's trying to deal with it.
What is our relationship with China going to look like?
Boy, that's the real question mark. I think when this is over, and it will be over, we need to reassess our relationship with China, and particularly our dependency. You know, think about the United States' advantages in the geopolitical sense. We can feed ourselves. Very few countries in the world can say that. We have an economy where we buy things, we make things, we buy things. We can really have an independent economy to a certain extent. And then finally, we've always, in the military national security field, we've always said, we need to make sure our supply chains for military equipment and technology are secure. We now have to add to that pharmaceuticals. We realized for the last 10 or so, 15, 20 years that we were dependent on Middle East oil. We're now energy independent, whatever happens with the price war. But at the final thing, so we can feed ourselves, we have our own energy, we have our own military supplies. The missing link is that we don't have our own pharmaceutical supplies.
What can we do to dramatically reduce, if not eliminate, our dependence on China? Would something like a Marshall Plan, in concert with our close allies, help us achieve such a goal?
Larry?
Well, okay. I don't want to pick on China right now. It's not high on my list. We are aware. The United States is aware of certain issues with China. We have engaged with them. We have a good trade deal the president negotiated with them, but there are issues. We'd like more American companies to come back home. We'll deal with that over a period of time, but we are engaged with China, and the president continues to enjoy a very good relationship with President Xi. As far as policies to get the companies home, there are a lot of things we could do. One of them, by the way, we don't have time to pursue it, Charles, maybe the next time. I would say 100% immediate expensing across the board. Plant, equipment, intellectual property, structures, renovations. In other words, if we had 100% immediate expensing, we would literally pay the moving costs of American companies from China back to the U.S. We would basically provide them with moving cost payments. That's one way. That's not the only item on the list, but I think 100% expensing would be a very good thing. And by the way, it would be a very good thing for American companies here at home. So that's just one pro-growth policy point.
This is also an opportunity for us. It is an opportunity for us to open our eyes. The American people have known this for decades. They've known that partnering with China is dangerous. They've known that sending our supply chains overseas was wrong. Now we have the opportunity to correct those mistakes. It's time that we go all in on America rather than all in on China, and we're going to have the chance to do that now.
You've seen in that video, there's a lot of people that talking about re-onshoring products from China. As we progress in the talk today, you'll realize why China is so significant, because they are such a huge trading partner with the United States and one of the largest exporters in the United States, in the world, I should say. Here's one thing, though, that they're missing, and this is the research that Shale Crescent did. We have a fundamental advantage on manufacturing that so many people don't understand, and that's what we'll hopefully share with you today. So there is a desire to bring things back, but we're going to show you there's an economic advantage to bringing things here. We're going to start with a little bit right now and talk about something. We started out with everybody talking about jobs, because everybody's interested in, during this time period, of increasing jobs right now. So when you look at it, hopefully you can read the chart. It starts in 1945 and goes up to here currently. The light color on the background chart are manufacturing jobs in the United States. The dark blue line is combined U.S. oil and gas production. Now, I'm going to share you something that many people in this audience know, but you need to share it with others who don't understand. There is a direct linkage between producing oil and gas, producing petrochemicals, and manufacturing jobs. Greg alluded to it with his radio interview in Colorado, and so many people miss that connection. If you look on this chart, in post-World War II, As long as we were increasing oil and gas production, we were increasing U.S. manufacturing jobs. In the late 70s, when U.S. oil and gas production peaks, so does manufacturing jobs at 19.4 million. Now, I lived that. I lived the Rust Belt era. What I didn't even understand, even though I'm a petroleum engineer for years, that what partially caused the Rust Belt was the lack of U.S. oil and gas production. But if you think about it, it's fundamentally simple. It takes energy to run a manufacturing plant, and oil and gas production produce 5,000 products that come from oil and gas. So if all of a sudden oil and gas is in short supply and it becomes expensive, then you're going to struggle with the manufacturing economy. You can see what happened then. We peak in the late 70s at 19.4 million jobs. We drop down several million jobs till we get to 2001. And then there was a trade deal letting China into the World Trade Organization. That immediately causes an abrupt drop of several million more jobs. We get as low as almost 11.5 million jobs at a certain point. This is why we have to talk about China in regards to bringing manufacturing jobs back. Now, this is good news, though, and very few people know it. Once we started increasing oil and gas production about 10 years ago from shale drilling, U.S. manufacturing jobs stopped their decline. Let me say that. U.S. manufacturing jobs stopped their decline, and all of a sudden then manufacturing jobs started to increase, and we've added 1.4 million. This was the optimism that gave us the inspiration to create Shale Crescent. We think there's a huge opportunity. We're at a historic point in time to bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S., but to the Shale Crescent in particular, the regions of Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. I got to give a lot of credit to our guy that runs Shale Crescent for us, Nathan Lord. He envisioned this chart and created it. We've shared this with numerous people, and you'd be surprised how many people, when they see this, say, I never really understood the relationship between oil and gas production and manufacturing jobs. Now, we may feel like some people we pick on China. That's not our intention. We are not having any disagreement with the Chinese people. China is the largest competitor we have in the world of manufacturing. As a matter of fact, these two little people right here were born in China, and those are 2 of my 10 grandchildren. And so I love them, and as a proud grandpa, I've got to share with you just a little video. That's them on Christmas Day. My son-in-law said it looked like the American troops rolling into Paris at the end of World War II, and that is the type toy that a grandpa buys for his grandchildren. And so we're going to get in and talk about manufacturing. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Wally, because Wally is our manufacturing expert.
Thank you, Jerry. And also, thank you for having us here today to go through this. You know, when we're talking about manufacturing, and particularly talking about manufacturing in China, there had to be a reason, there had to be an economic reason for us to be in the situation that we're in right now. So we'll look a little bit like that. If we look at the imports of manufactured goods that were manufactured in China from, you know, maybe around the early 1990s up until present. And you heard Jerry talk about this when China joined the WTO. I actually was living and working in China from 2000 to 2004. I remember all of that stuff going on very well. But you could see that since they joined WTO right here, the amount of imports from China into the U.S. have risen. So we're looking at like $7 trillion worth of goods that occurred during that time. Now, if we look at that at the same time, so this red chart is kind of that same data, and the bars are now the same one Jerry was showing you, which are U.S. manufacturing jobs. So at the same time that this was happening, you know, this dramatic increase of imports coming from China, this is what was happening to the U.S. jobs. That was happening because we had a shortage of energy that was going on at the time, But the big difference was, what was the incentive? What was the difference? And it was all about labor cost. Companies started looking at, what labor advantages they could get if they moved their manufacturing over to China. And if we look at this, if those same goods were manufactured in the U.S., based on some analysis, it would have cost about $8 trillion. Instead, we imported them at 7, so we saved roughly about $1 trillion of actual money to get these goods into our country. And so if we really look at that, what happened during that time? Well, we saved us $1 trillion. Everybody got things that they acquired that were manufactured in China and saved that money. But now we realize we lost production of petrochemicals. All of a sudden, everybody with COVID going on saying, "What do you mean there's no there's no pharmaceuticals that are made in the U.S. or not certain ones that we couldn't get? What do you mean we can't? You mean the United States can't make enough PPE for people if we have a pandemic?" Loss of intellectual property. Been a lot of talk about that. Loss of revenue to the government. You lose a $1 trillion worth of manufacturing jobs. You lose a lot of revenue going to the government, and this is the jobs. So was that a good cost analysis benefit? It doesn't seem like it right now. At the time, there was a lot that went on and went into that, and most of it was about labor cost. So, if we take a look at this, for every one manufacturing job that we lose or we gain, and we're wanting now to be talking about gaining them, we actually get 5 other jobs that come along with it. A plant that is manufactured, and there's other support services that are provided to that plant and provided to that, and the numbers come out that there's 5 times the job. So every one job that we can create in manufacturing, we actually create 6 jobs. So, our focus is by creating manufacturing jobs, we're going to create these supporting jobs, we'll increase that government revenue, and we'll improve some of the supply chain uncertainty and security that we have right now associated with things like pharmaceuticals, like PPE, and other stuff. There's certain things beyond just the military that should be made in the United States. We learned a lot of that during COVID. And there's a lot of other things that could be made in the United States once again, because those economics associated with labor cost have changed. If we look, so this is published by the Boston Consulting Group, and it has taken a look at the labor costs across the world. And it has the U.S. over here, which is the third one in, and the U.S. is where they're benchmarking. So they're saying if the U.S. is 100, how does everybody else stack up? Well, China right now still remains very low, but not near as low as they used to be. They're between 95 and 97% of the cost of labor in the United States. So when you're looking at that, you're going, holy smokes, that big advantage that was taking me over there, their labor costs have gone up to where their manufacturing index numbers are getting very close to ours. And so a lot of the advantage that they originally had, went away. And so when we look at this, this is the wording that was put out by my boss. It says, China, the world's biggest exporter, has also seen significant change. A once erroneous cost advantage over the United States and other leading industrial economies has been eroding for years. I could tell you, I saw that when I worked there. We had wage increases of 10, 15, 17% that were happening every year, while in the U.S., wages were kind of stagnant because we were losing manufacturing jobs, largely due to double-digit increases in wages that far outpaced productivity, growth, strength, and relatively high energy costs. Relatively high energy costs. The biggest thing that has changed most recently is what happens to the energy costs around the world. China is a big importer of all of their energy. They have a small amounts of energy but they produce. And so the advantage that they've had in labor is almost gone, and the energy is a big thing, and Jerry's going to talk more about that.
Thank you, Wally. And since I'm a petroleum engineer, I'm kind of coming back to talk about the energy advantage, and I think that's a significant thing that very few people grasp, and Wally alluded to it. You know, one thing I learned from Wally from his time in China, I did not realize that although China seems omnipresent to compete against, there are ways we can compete against them, and one of them is energy. If you look, again, this is the chart I showed you earlier displayed a different way. This is combined U.S. oil and gas production, starting from World War II. What you see is it increased, like I said, until the 1970s. At that point, we were the leading oil producer in the world. And then what happens is we peak and we start to decline. Like I said, the Rust Belt happens. And then about 10 years ago, we go to shale drilling, which is why we formed Shale Crescent. And look at that. We've far exceeded the peak that we set in the 1970s, and we are almost 50% above that peak. This gives us a huge energy advantage over what we've ever had historically, and it also makes us the #1 oil and gas producer in the world. This is why the Boston Consulting Group said when Wally showed you those numbers, it was a little bit of labor, a little bit of energy, and a little bit of delivery cost was all mixed in. And so when you see it, we have a huge advantage on energy. Well, let's kind of compare ourselves to China. We compared natural gas production. The reason is natural gas production is normally a manufacturing fuel in most countries. It's what you run an industrial plant with, and as I said earlier, there's over 5,000 products that come from hydrocarbons because many things you touch every day started their life as a natural gas molecule. Well, who would think that here in the United States, we produce 5 times more natural gas than China? That gives us a huge competitive advantage, which offsets their lower labor cost. Here's a chart that we made up several years ago. We knew it must have been popular because Deloitte copied it from us, and then we copied it from Deloitte. But here it is. It lists the top natural gas producers in the world, all 10 of them, in forced rank order. I should point out to you that these 10 countries represent nearly 2/3 of all the natural gas produced in the whole world. So that shows you, if you're on this list, you have a huge competitive advantage against all the other countries. #1 is the rest of the United States without Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, the Shale Crescent. #2 is Russia. #3 is us. Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, we were our own country, would be the 3rd largest natural gas producer in the world. That was some of the earliest research that Shale Crescent did. And then you see the rest of the list, and you see China down there about #7. Now, every year this list will vary a little bit, but it more or less looks just like it is. This also tells you something why we are so excited about our opportunity to bring manufacturing jobs here. If you look at the rest of these countries, and we'll go through this with you, they don't have all the advantages we have. And Wally said it from the very first day we ever formed Shale Crescent. You not only want to have an energy advantage, you need water for manufacturing and processing and for transportation, and you also need your markets close to where you make things. And we'll drill down into those details as we go on today. So we have a huge competitive advantage not only over China, but the rest of the world. So we're going to talk about that today. We did a lot of research, and one of the guys that volunteers with us is Dr. Ben Thomas, professor of petroleum, retired professor, I should say now, of petroleum engineering at Merida College. And we did these really detailed reports with a very good firm, IHS Markit, and these things are several inches thick. And that's the reports I alluded to earlier. If you're a petrochemical company or a manufacturing company, we'd be happy to share those with you. But Dr. Thomas told us something. He said, you've got to be able to explain this in layman's terms so that you can have an elevator speech with someone. So this is where we've reduced this down to an elevator speech. Those reports were written by engineers. I'm an engineer, and I don't mean that in a positive way. So what we found out was, and I started with this today, there is a huge profitability advantage of building on top the feedstock and building in the center of your customers. Now, why do we say that? We'll drill down into that today. Is if you build on top the feedstock, you don't have to pay enormous transportation costs like Wally alluded to from China, who may have to ship molecules halfway around the world. That's expensive. If you finish the product there And one of the largest economies in the world is within a day's drive of our region. You don't have to pay those enormous costs to then ship the finished product to your customers. That's what gives us a huge economic advantage that was alluded to in the Boston Consulting Group's research. We're going to talk a little bit, since I'm a petroleum engineer, about building on top of the feedstock, and then I'll hand it back to Wally, and he'll talk to you a little bit about the advantage of building center customers. Here's something to really think about, and this is why we're speaking at the Pittsburgh Chemical Day, is if you look at this enormous amount of natural gas production that's increased over the last 10 years, what very few people realize, 85% of that growth came from Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. 85% of the increased natural gas production, this enormous amount of natural gas, historic terms of what we've done in the last 10 years, came from these three states. That gives us a huge competitive advantage. But that's only half the equation. As we speak today, you'll see the other advantage this region has. If you look at it today, the Shale Crescent, Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, the three states are half the size of Texas. Texas is an enormous state. I used to live there when I started my career. We now produce more natural gas than the state of Texas. This is something that hasn't happened in over 100 years. This is an enormous change in the market, and it creates this opportunity, and it's why we're here today from Shale Crescent. I said that we're into a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and this is why you see. This is something that hasn't happened in 100 years. Texas is the #1 producer of oil and natural gas in the United States, just in case you did not know that. Here's another way to look at the data. If you look at the red, Shale Crescent USA, the yellow is the rest of the United States. This is from the IHS market report. It's forecasted out to the year 2040. What you see is something really interesting. It shows what I alluded to earlier. Virtually all the growth has come from the red area, Shale Crescent USA. If you look out the next 20 years, IHS is projecting that virtually all the growth in the next 20 years is going to come from Shale Crescent USA. So if you're thinking about building an energy-intensive manufacturing plant, a petrochemical plant that uses natural gas, wouldn't it make sense to locate your business where virtually all the growth has happened and is projected to happen? If you were only looking at half the equation of building on top of the feedstock, that gives you enormous cost competitive advantage. But Wally will show you the other half of the equation, and you got to know why we use equations. We happen to be engineers. Of course, the nice thing is most of the people making the investment decisions in the chemical business are engineers also. If you look at the natural gas liquid production, this is where you take the molecules and you turn them into the products that we see every day. We're projected to increase in natural gas liquid production too. At the end of that time period, we'll be making as much natural gas liquid as the entire United States made 10 years ago. So this again gives us a huge competitive advantage over not only the rest of the United States, but the world in general. Well, I'm going to turn it back to Wally now, because half the equation is you'll save a tremendous amount of money by building on top of the feedstock. The other half is the amount of money you'll save by building in the center of your customers.
So in the petrochemical industry, most of the time we have to make a choice. Do I build a plant where the raw material is and ship the product I'm producing to my customers? Or do I want to build the plant close to where my customers are and I ship the raw materials in to me, and then the petrochemical is close to my customers? You know, we were talking about China and talking about the differences between the U.S. and China. Well, China doesn't have the natural gas and the natural gas liquids that Jerry just talked about. I mean, most of that stuff has to be brought in. And for the most part, most of the cracker plants that are in China right now are fed by something called naphtha. And naphtha is sold basically at parity with crude oil. And so the reason there's been so much petrochemical investments in North America is because of this natural gas advantage that we have in the natural gas and liquids that comes from the drilling mostly in the Shale Crescent region, but also some other parts of the U.S. So You know, when we look at the market within North America, there's a big advantage of being where we are located in Shale Crescent, USA. I mean, within a day's drive of where we are today here in Pittsburgh, within a day's drive, what do we have present? Well, from a polyethylene demand standpoint, we have 70% of the polyethylene demand is within a day's drive of where we are today. And if we look at polypropylene, we have 77% of that. So I alluded to you that we have a big advantage. North America has a big advantage over the rest of the world where they don't have the natural gas liquids to where they're using naphtha as a main feedstock. And inside of North America, you know, we have the advantage that Jerry was talking about, and you could see that the second advantage we have is that we're, you know, within the proximity of our customers. So we're really in a situation that we can build on top of the feedstock, as Jerry talked about, and we can build in the center of the customers. So if we take a look at manufacturing in China, okay, we're manufacturing these things in China, bringing the raw materials in, so you're paying the shipping to bring the raw materials in, you're producing it. For years they were taking advantage of low-cost labor. Most of that's gone now, not all of it, but a lot of it is. And then the product is there and the market's over here. So we have significant advantage over that situation. So let's look inside of North America. This was a studies that we Shale Crescent commissioned with IHS about what type of advantages we have based on the products that are produced here in the Shale Crescent region. We have a 15% advantage on the methane molecule. We can see some evidence of that with some of the investments going into methanol plants. We have a 32% in ethane. This is why Shell is building here. Hopefully we have additional crackers. You know, based on the study, there's room for as many as 5 crackers in this region based on the availability. We have an 11% advantage on propane and a 9% advantage on butane. These are advantages over the other parts of the U.S. which already have an advantage over the rest of the world. So if you're looking for a place to invest, people are looking at North America. You can see that there's a lot of investment going on. From a cost advantage of producing products with these things, so I've actually made products. So if we look at the methane molecule, we've got methanol. They're able to save 26%. Ammonia and urea, which are made from this, is a 12%. The ethylene and the polyethylene produced has a 23% advantage over producing on the Gulf Coast. We have a lot of investment going on the Gulf Coast, but there's economic advantage of doing it here. And we have a 10 to 11% cost advantage for polypropylene. You know, so if you were, we did a study, IHS did a study that compared the two, and it shows that the net present value of making the investment here instead of on the Gulf Coast or instead of in China, we have a significant advantage, 4 times compared to the Gulf Coast and even higher than that compared to the rest of the world. So the truth is, you know, Jerry said we're engineers, we like equations, and we do. Petrochemical profitability is really equal to investment in Shale Crescent USA. That's we think this is the right place for investments to be made. We think there are a lot of advantages, and we can look at some other advantages of why it is here. One is fresh water. You know, the company that I work for, we operate in like 53 countries, and we have a lot of places in the world where we struggle to get enough fresh water. You know, we are blessed with a tremendous amount of fresh water from the Ohio River in the Shale Crescent region. And this is very important for processing, but not only that, but for transportation. You can see the productive waterways. It's very easy to get things out via port as well as via rail. We have a very skilled and trained workforce. You know, a lot of people don't know that there's a tremendous amount of petrochemical infrastructure already in our region, and there are a lot of very, very good workers. The quality of the work that is done, the productivity level. You know, we talked about, you know, China having this big raise in their cost without any offset in productivity. The U.S. has got the highest productivity workers of any place in the world, and there's a lot of data that can support that. And so this is something, and here we've got very good, high-quality trained workers available. So, you know, one of the things that, you know, you see about a lot, we just saw it recently, is the number of hurricanes and stuff that impact the Gulf Coast. If you take a look at natural gas, by the development of all the natural gas production in the Shale Crescent region, when a hurricane hits the Gulf Coast, it no longer impacts the price of natural gas because we can make it up from here. But the same thing is not true with petrochemicals. When a major hurricane hits anywhere on the Gulf Coast, it shuts down so much petrochemical capacity that is very disruptive to the economy and disruptive to the markets. So this is another advantage that Shale Crescent would have over the Gulf Coast region. So let's talk a little bit about China, and I'll invite Jerry to come back up. You know, we talked about a little bit about, you know, the transportation to and from. So this is a big advantage that, one, North America has over that. We learned a lot during COVID, the advantages or the disadvantages of not having a lot of products produced in North America that need to be. And here are some basic advantages. Jerry talked about energy. I talked about customer demand, water, workforce, you know, reduced emissions. So from a sustainability standpoint, if you can produce the energy, convert the energy into products, and deliver it to the customers without having to move something all over the world, you save a tremendous amount of CO2 without having to do all of that transportation. So we certainly would have less emissions with plants built here compared to other locations.
You know, when I started out today, I said, you know, we did a lot of research, and we did. It's an enormous amount of research we've conducted. Like I said, we'd be happy to share it with you. This is how we can share it with you in detail. If you're a qualified petrochemical plant or, you know, an energy-intensive manufacturing plant, that's IHS's work. We've just given you the highlights. But what we've shown you is, I started with saying the answer we found out, even though the engineering research was detailed, was both profound but simple. There is a huge cost advantage of building on top of the resource and in the center of your customers. And after we started looking at this, what we realized is we can't think of anywhere else in the world, and that's the reason I listed the top 10 countries in the world to produce natural gas, where you have this energy advantage, particularly that we have in these 3 states right here. So we think it's a great place for you to bring and expand your business. A lot of people are going to be looking at onshoring. A lot of people are going to look at cost reduction. As Wally said, a lot of people are starting to look at sustainability, but it's interesting to me they don't look at this whole issue. The easiest way to both increase your profits and reduce your emissions is by looking at where you locate that facility. So if you want to talk to us in detail, we've got Greg, who introduced us. His telephone number is 304-545-7259. We've got his email out there, gkozera, that's with a K, K-O-Z-E-R-A, good Pittsburgh name, at shalecrescentusa.com. We've got these times, or if these times aren't convenient, call us and we'll set up a detailed presentation to how to increase the profitability of your business. And hopefully if you do that, you'll start with our mission, which is to increase manufacturing jobs in this region. Appreciate the time.
Thank you very much for your time, and we're going to transition over to the conference room and we'll answer some questions.
Thank you.